So good evening. I want to invite everyone to grab a seat. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks, Marsh. So my name is Brenda Freege, and I'm serving as the president and CEO of the Rethink Coalition, and it is great to just have you all here this evening. And on behalf of the Rethink Coalition, I just want to welcome you to really an important event. This is really important for me in the sense that I have not seen a number of the leadership from Rethink Coalition in person. This is the first time, so it's great to see faces, even partial faces, so thank you all for being here. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Rethink story as we move along, and we'll move quickly then into the feature for this evening, which is listening to Alelia Bundles. But I think as we get started here, our focus tonight is on highway construction. And the statement that you see on the screen really does say it all. We have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to transform central Indiana by how we rebuild the inner loop. So that's what we're focusing on. How are we going to rebuild the inner loop? It's nearing the end of its life, and like that north split that's under construction right now, it's going to have to be replaced sometime in the next 10 to 15 years. We don't know when. That seems like a long time. It's really not when it comes to planning for transportation infrastructure of that size. Our goal is to learn from our lessons from the past, and if we rebuild it differently, we can catalyze inclusive economic development, we can enhance our neighborhoods, we can improve our environment, and we can drive job creation, all by how we rebuild a highway. And Rethink Coalition is pursuing this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So to get started, I want to tell you just a little bit about the history of Rethink Coalition and how it did get started. So it began in 2017 when INDOT first unveiled plans for how they were going to rebuild the North Split. And those plans included more lanes, they included higher walls, and they really would have increased the physical barrier that the highway creates on that North Split section and then continues around the city. Fortunately, there were concerned citizens, including people who knew a lot about transportation and urban design, several of whom are here this evening, and they were paying attention. And they raised concerns, and they started a movement. And that movement became the Rethink 6570 Coalition. Eventually, INDOT modified the plans for the North Split. So what is being built now is different than what was originally planned, and that's really important. And if some would say, and most of us would say, that what's being rebuilt now is really better. Is it Rethink's vision? No, it doesn't go all the way. They were a little bit too late to get the whole thing redesigned, but it is better. Now we have an opportunity to rethink the rest of the inner loop, and we have time. So, during the conversation with INDOT and the many, many meetings that so many people had, through the generosity of the Lilly Endowment, the Indy Chamber, and Rethink, sponsored a study by an internationally recognized firm, Arup. And today, the study was about trying to find the optimal solution for rebuilding the rest of the inner loop. And the study looks at the pink areas that are on the slide and compares two options, rebuild as is versus rebuilding using recessed construction. And what Arup found was that it is technically feasible and economically viable to rebuild the highway using recessed construction, and the benefits of doing so really could transform the city and provide exponential economic and other benefits. And that's a really bold statement to say that it could transform the city. So how could a highway and construction of that highway really transform a city? Well, to answer this question, all we have to do is look back at our history, and we can see that the inner loop has transformed downtown Indianapolis in dramatic ways. And you can learn all about that through the study, which is on our website at www.rethink6570.org. Rebuilding recess can have the same effects, providing positive benefits that can continue the ability to move trucks and cars, really important, around the city efficiently and safely, while reconnecting our urban grid, reconnecting communities, improving the quality of life for residents and visitors, helping to repair environmental injustices, position us to better adapt to climate change, and to set the city up to thrive as an economic driver for the state for generations. Rebuilding as is provides us with none of those benefits. It only maintains what we have, and that's a really important thing to keep in mind. So with the Arab study as a foundation, Rethink decided it was time to move from a grassroots group to a formal legal entity, and to take on a new role, really, that of a collaborative leader in addressing the complex public challenge of how we rebuild the highway. And Rethink is partnered through board appointments with the Central Indiana Community Foundation, with Indiana Landmarks, and the Indy Chamber, three very long-standing and important anchor institutions in the city. And that was intentional, because Rethink is really a collaborative partner in this conversation. Our mission is to educate, advise, and collaborate, and our vision is that infrastructure becomes the catalyst that we think it can be. We want to rebuild the capital city and the surrounding region and make sure it's vibrant and innovative and a healthy place to live, work, and visit. Achieving this requires a really bold and imaginative leadership and wise and collaborative decision-making, which is why you all are here, because so many of you are leaders in the city, and we need everyone to be a part of the conversation. And Rethink is committed to help make it happen. And when we think about the highway itself, something we really want to keep in mind is that our focus is to expand the criteria that's used to assess how highways are rebuilt. So base criteria is you look at traffic performance, motorist safety, construction complexity, and environmental impacts. An expanded criteria starts to look at local connectivity, quality of life, complete communities, and equitable development. And these are really important things to keep in mind, because that highway is more than just a thing that moves cars and trucks. That's really, really important, but it impacts so much more. And Rethink has then what we call an inner loop plus focus. We have this expanded focus, recognizing that the highway infrastructure affects areas beyond the inner loop. We want to support residents and partners working to optimize transportation and highway infrastructure throughout our urban core. And this will involve drawing on the research of education partners, input from stakeholders, best practices from other cities, and knowledge from a range of areas that intersect with urban highways and transportation infrastructure. This is a big project. We've got time to do it right, and we need all of you to get involved. Our activities as Rethink Coalition is to educate and advise and collaborate, and it's through those things that we facilitate stakeholder engagement in this visioning for the future. And that's going to look a lot like hosting community conversations, advising and collaborating in the planning, and building on the Arab study with more research. It's also going to look a lot like learning together and trying to share what we're learning beyond Indianapolis. Rethink Coalition wants to turn this inner loop visioning and design and planning into a resource for other cities, to create a collab, so to speak, that would bring together thought leaders and policymakers and residents and community stakeholders and students and so many others to conduct research, prototype and test ideas, and publish what we're learning. It's only together that Indianapolis and Central Indiana and the state is going to be able to tackle some of the tremendous challenges that we all face. And we can do it together, though, and the spirit of this place and the spirit of the people in Indianapolis can help make it happen. So how can you get involved and stay engaged? Well, you're all leaders, and you can be a part of this legacy-building effort. We encourage you to learn along with us and to use your influence to expand the conversation in ways that can lead to better decision-making. So a critical piece of learning is to understand our past. And so that's our focus for tonight, is to understand our past so that we don't repeat in the future the lessons we should have learned, so that we can then anticipate and plan for a future that we all desire, instead of arriving at the future we didn't want. So tonight you're going to hear from Alelia Bundles and from her friend, Justin Garrett Moore, about the past and the implications for infrastructure design on our future. So I'm going to invite Charlie Richardson, who is a co-chair for Rethink, to come up, and he's going to introduce Alelia Bundles. And as he comes forward, I want all of us to give him a special thanks, because it is really his generosity that has made this evening possible. Thank you, Charlie. And I also want to thank Indiana Landmarks for hosting this event and for helping to sponsor. The leadership and the staff of Indiana Landmarks are really, truly remarkable, and they have been so supportive and critical to all of this work. And you've got to admit, this space is just amazing. As some of you know, I'm ordained as an elder in the United Methodist Church, and it really does warm my heart to see this space, which was originally Central Avenue United Methodist Church, continue to be used for important life-giving events. Over a century ago, a Sunday school group from the church that lived here gave birth to a hospital that is now IU Health. Maybe a century from now, when people look at a highway system that looks dramatically different from what we have today, people will look back on this moment and note how the spirit of this place has lived on through the work of Indiana Landmarks. So thank you all.
On September the 9th, 1952, one of the most consequential Americans of the 20th century, General Dwight David Eisenhower, made a presidential campaign appearance in Indianapolis at the request of my next-door neighbor in Bedford, United States Senator William Ezra Jenner. Jenner was running for re-election, and he needed Ike, big time. Ike and Jenner went from the Circle to Indiana Avenue, the heart, the soul, and the center of Indiana's booming African-American business, cultural, arts, housing, and financial community. This was Indiana Avenue that day in 1952, a vibrant part of the fabric of a thriving city, commanding an appearance by the GOP's presidential candidate. In a little over 20 years, all of it was gone, due at least in part to an interstate highway program championed by President Dwight David Eisenhower. Our speaker tonight was 3 months and 2 days old as I spoke on Indiana Avenue that day in 1952. She was making nights difficult, nay, sleep impossible for her parents, where the Bundles family lived in Chicago. Indeed, she didn't stop crying for another 2 years and 10 months until the Bundles family moved to Indianapolis. All crying miraculously ceased when Alelia became a Hoosier, as you see here. Bundles family leadership, example, and inspiration in Indianapolis began, continuing that of the Walker family, and it hasn't stopped from that day to this. How many of you here tonight can point to a family civic and business centrality for over 110 years? Alelia Bundles is a true Indianapolis legend, great-great-granddaughter of Madam C.J. Walker, author, journalist, an Emmy Award-winning television news producer, an academician and leader of Columbia University, North Central High School, and Harvard educated in that order. She's a real star with a passion for making Indianapolis all it has the potential to be as we think about its past and vision its future. Ms. Bundles accepted our invitation to come to Indianapolis to talk with the whole Rethink Coalition family and all of you who care so deeply about our city, our state, and our future. As you will hear, she has also brought to us by video another Indianapolis inspiration and national leader, Justin Garrett Moore. What a blessing to have Alelia Bundles here. What a blessing she is to all of us in our capital city. Just last month, Ms. Bundles was recognized at the annual Indiana Historical Society event as an Indiana Living Legend. Like all of you, she cares deeply about our city and our state and puts her passion into action. Alelia Bundles, like her amazing parents and Madam C.J. Walker, is a dime among nickels. Richard Green Lugar wrote in his last book, Growing Up in Indiana, one learns early on that talent and accomplishments count, but honesty and integrity count more. It is my honor to present to all of you a shining example of stunning talent, of remarkable accomplishment, but most of all of honesty, integrity, and moral clarity that gives us hope for our future. She and we must together build a more vibrant, just, fair, and exciting Indianapolis for all who live, work, and visit here. And I'm pretty sure that Lugar and Eisenhower are cheering us on this time around to do it right, really right, taking advantage of the best thinking from around the country about how to do our repair and rebuild in the 21st century with the presence here today of Deborah Archer, a true Indianapolis icon and an Indiana hero and legend. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Alelia Perry Bundles.
You know, when you get to be Charlie's friend, you don't have a better champion. Charlie, thank you. And where did you find that picture? Oh, my goodness. And when you mention Senator Lugar, my mother was a serious Democrat, but she worked in Lugar's administration at a time when people worked together. Amen. I'm just so honored to be here and to be able to talk about my hometown and to see all of you who care deeply about Indianapolis and the future of Indianapolis. And we were originally going to do this on October 5th, and Charlie spoke with someone who said, oh no, you can't do this because that's the night Brian Stevenson is at Clues Hall. You won't have anybody in the audience. And so we rescheduled. Originally, Justin Garrett Moore was going to be here in person, but we were able to have a conversation via Zoom a couple of days ago. So I'm just delighted that Justin Garrett Moore was able to make some time for us with his extremely busy schedule. He is a native of Indianapolis and the inaugural program officer for the Humanities in Place program at the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. He is a co-founder with members of his family of Urban Patch, a social enterprise focused on sustainable design and development projects in Indianapolis, throughout the United States, and Rwanda. Earlier this year, he was appointed by the White House to the President's Commission on Fine Arts. So we're going to watch a conversation between me and Justin. It started out as 5 minutes, but Justin has so much to say that it's a little bit longer. I know you will enjoy it. Justin, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. And this is a really important conversation for my hometown, Indianapolis. So I'm happy to take some time to have it with you.
Well, I appreciate it. And yes, you have very deep roots in Indianapolis. And you knew the community before the highways, which is part of our discussion today. What should people know about the impact of the construction of the highways and IUPUI and the legacy that has been left?
Yes, this is such an important conversation for our cities, our communities in many ways. The infrastructure for how we've built America and what we kind of think about life in America is in so many ways tied to our cars, how we get around, and things you take for granted. But what's really important is to think about how that happened and why it happened and where it happened. The highways in many cases were built in and through communities that were predominantly Black, predominantly working class, predominantly low income. And the impact of that was in many cases transformative in disrupting the lives of those communities. The highways in Indianapolis, for example, carved through some of the core areas of our Black communities, disrupting the businesses, disrupting the lives, disrupting the assets that families had built over time. So this is important to kind of understand this full impact, right? The disruption of lives, the loss of wealth, the curtailing of opportunity, and the impact that that has left for generations. The other important thing to know about highway construction in particular is that it was connected to other ideas and other policies that were happening at the time, with planning and urban development, with policies and economic development strategies. All of these together had huge impacts beyond only kind of the footprint of the highway and really impacted adjacent communities. So urban renewal type policies, including the development of the IUPUI campus, are completely linked to the conversation that's being had about the highway. And so this kind of history and legacy needs to be sort of unknotted and unbundled so that we can address all the different issues at hand.
Well, and you remember your grandfather's house in the neighborhood.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So my great-grandfather in that case, and well, grandfather lived there too, William Johnson Moore, he was born enslaved and eventually with the Great Migration made his way north to Indianapolis for opportunity and lived on Annette Street, which is today the footprint of the IUPUI campus. Actually, like Kavanaugh Hall, right, is where people like my grandfather once lived and were a part of that story of displacement.
So you have degrees in architecture and urban design. So you are one of our experts tonight. You've been executive director of the New York City Public Design Commission, where you led initiatives to address social equity and inclusion and sustainability through built environment design and public processes. What opportunities do you see for Indianapolis as community members and urban planners rethink the future of I-65 and I-70?
Yeah, I love this prompt and opportunity that exists in Indianapolis. This is something that a lot of cities have been doing and rethinking. I live here in New York City, and there was once the kind of the West Side Highway, elevated highway down on the west side of Manhattan, and that highway coming down created an incredible opportunity for transformation of that community, improved public spaces, better urban life and development opportunities, frankly, that emerged from really rethinking some of the legacy infrastructures and frankly, legacy bad decisions that we've had in American cities. And Indianapolis is no different. So the opportunities for thinking about social equity and social justice, really to correct some of the negative impacts and real harm that our communities have seen can be a part of this process. And so this is a space and opportunity to open up those conversations. But the great thing about planning and design is that it's the space of what's possible, right? People can be creative, you can be visionary, you can problem solve, and you can do really transformative projects. Something I always tell people is if you think about how huge and imaginative and transformative it was to do something like to build these highways, right? To take whole communities and carve them out, spend tons of money and labor and resource building this infrastructure. It was big, and it's going to need to be equally big, if not bigger, to go back and address it. And the work that is already happening with Rethink and the coalition and all of the multiple conversations that are being had about the future of the community are really, really great. And planning and design and community engagement are going to be the best way to get the best result for Indianapolis's present and for its future.
Well, you know, what you're saying is sort of the intention. There was so much will, so much thought, so many resources that went into creating this transformation of cities. It takes that same amount of will and political push to
Absolutely.
make this happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, we call it in the field, we call it the different types of work, right? So there was policy work done, there were political conversations, there was organizing, there were business models done, there was design and creativity, right? There are so many different things that need to come together, and that is absolutely what's possible here. And to be innovative and forward thinking about it. Yes, this harm has been done, but there's really this great potential in repair. Some might know the Japanese pottery where when the cup breaks, they repair it with gold. And it becomes this sort of beautiful sort of idea that repairing can be even more wonderful than what was there before. And that opportunity exists here as well.
Well, you know, I mean, when you and I go back home to Indianapolis, because we both live in other places, but we still love our hometown, it is really incredible to see downtown. And that took some intentional will to, because it was dying.
Yeah.
So we know that it can be done, and we know that there are people who are visionary in Indianapolis if they put their minds to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's that's one of the beauties of Indianapolis. It's it was a well-planned city. Actually, you know, from the beginning, it has what we call good bones. And you know, there were some breaks, but the structure is there. It's walkable, good environments, you know, good scales, access to green spaces. The opportunity there is huge. And so, you know, using an opportunity in a project like this to think, well, how can we do even better? How can we do even more? How can we be even more inclusive for the communities that exist and frankly, communities that are going to continue to come to the city? And Indianapolis, I've been telling people is for forever, you know, it can compete in so many different ways with what are considered to be the great cities of the country. And it's just a matter of kind of aligning the right will, the right resources, and the right leadership to make it happen.
So Justin, who are the stakeholders, and how can everyone who needs to be a part of the process be given equal voice?
Yeah, this is really important to think about who is at the table, who isn't at the table, what kinds of knowledge are really needed to think through all the challenges and difficulty that are going to be needed. So obviously the local communities, the longtime residents are at the table, should be given voice and given the opportunity to weigh in. But you also need really a kind of a coalition of people that will be thinking creatively in a forward-thinking way, not just about what is in that immediate spot, but understanding how it affects the whole of the city. That's really, really important, especially because, and this is a conversation we've had previously, Alelia, there are so many people that were displaced and erased that are not in the immediate local community any longer. There are multiple generations of connection to that place that may need to be sort of reinvested in, and to think about the city as a whole and who has access to downtown, who wants to be a part of that vision and future. So you need that combination of kind of the local, like the people directly impacted and affected, but you also need the city as a community to care about its heart, its core. The downtown is the heart of the city, right? So everyone needs to really have some thinking and connection there. The other piece is to be mindful of, frankly, the technical and creative expertise that's needed. Engineers, designers, urban planners, people that do community and economic development, people that think about arts and culture in creative ways. you can bring together all these different minds and hearts, and see how they can kind of create and problem solve together, to think about not just what may be the simple solution or what may be the vision that people can immediately think of, but to open up the opportunities for this transformation to serve many different purposes and many different populations. So the potential is great.
Well, and we've seen this with Bottle Works along Massachusetts Avenue, how that's been revitalized. 16 Tech is, that corridor is going to be amazing. It's going to take a little time, but you already see the elements that are there. So if all of this collaboration happens, if the stakeholders who should be involved come together, what would be your vision for Indiana Avenue and what is now Martin Luther King, but was Northwestern when you and I were growing up?
Yes, yes. This is really important. The city, again, it was a very well-planned city. So there are these quadrants, right? And all the quadrants have seen investment and new resources and rethinking. And it is long overdue that the quadrant that, unsurprisingly happened to be the one associated with Black people and Black agency and kind of a Black identity are long overdue to get its investment, to get its rethinking. There are some huge assets there. You have what in the field you call the anchor institutions, things like the university and the hospital that are in a position to have real resources. They've got land, they've got development, they've got kind of program and population that could be brought to bear to see a more equitable and frankly reparative outcome for that quadrant of the city, which is such an important quadrant for Indianapolis. There's also the opportunity for, really thinking about this idea of the public realm and the public infrastructure to be done in a way that is for this time and for our future, that are more environmentally, socially, and culturally rich. And all of again, the bones are there, the ingredients are all there. You've got these two important streets, Indiana Avenue and Martin Luther King. Well, Martin Luther King, sort of turning into West Street as it goes further downtown. That is a golden opportunity to bring new investment, to bring life back to that community, and to do it in a way that makes Indianapolis special, right? Bottle Works, you mentioned, of course, Fountain Square, Indiana Avenue, Martin Luther King. All of that potential is there, and it's just a matter of putting the resources and the mindset to making it happen. And the highway, the larger kind of project, again, there's the footprint of the highway, but it had effects. The streets being designed and what was taken down and widened, and all of that can be rethought and done in a new way along with that project as well.
Justin, thank you so much. Next time we do this, I would love to do it in person.
Yes.
I know that everyone here who is hearing you has learned something, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Yes, thank you so much. And I come back all the time. I just couldn't come back at this particular window. So I will be around in Indy in the near future for sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So you see why I wanted Justin to talk. Okay, I'm trying to advance to the next. It's not working. I might need some technical help while I sort of kibbutz. Thank you. So we are so lucky to have Justin as an Indianapolis native. He is brilliant. And there are so many people here tonight who are those stakeholders he was talking about. Some who I know I invited who weren't able to come, who others invited, but we know that the brain power is in this room tonight to talk about the future and to continue the work that Rethink is already doing. So there are so many different parts of the city that will benefit from this rethinking. I'm going to focus a little bit on what I knew growing up and what I think is possible. So Madam C.J. Walker, my great-great-grandmother, is the reason that I did a lot of research. But I also had relatives who were in Indianapolis even before she arrived in 1910. My grandmother's family had been free people of color in North Carolina who moved to Indiana in the 1820s and 1830s as it was becoming a state. Ultimately, they ended up in Noblesville and then in the community around Indiana Avenue. So I'm one of those people who has some really deep roots in Indiana. But Madam Walker was drawn to Indianapolis because of the thriving black business community along Indiana Avenue. These things were long gone by the time I was growing up, but you see what those buildings look like. And when she got here, there was a big fundraising campaign to build the Senate Avenue YMCA. Long gone, one of the historic places, Marsh, that I know Indiana Landmarks would have saved had it still been around. But the black and white communities worked together to build this building. It was the largest black YMCA in the United States. I can't go into the long story about that, but it is an example of communities working together for the good of everyone. Madam Walker bought a home on what is now Martin Luther King, 640 Northwest Street, built her factory behind it, surrounded herself with some of the brightest, the best and the brightest within her community, including F.B. Ransom. Ransom Place is named after him. And then, let's see, there we go, up, back. And she envisioned this building that is now the Madam Walker Legacy Center that we all know. It is along, as Justin said, with the anchor with Indiana University, IUPUI and the medical center. This is the tangible legacy of the black community, but just about the only thing that's left. But when I was a little girl, I would visit the building with my mother, ride up the elevator with Mary, the elevator operator, who would open the door, and my mother in her 3-inch heels would click across the terrazzo floor into her office on the 4th floor. You see her there on the, there's my mom right there. I'm her twin. But I would go into her office, play on her typewriter and her adding machine before computers and calculators. Then we would go back into the factory and see the ladies who were mixing the products by hand. Go downstairs to the Walker Drug Store, which my grandfather managed, and we'd go on Sundays, and I could have 2 things of ice cream, both a drumstick and a sherbet push-up. And then we would have lunch in the coffee pot. Many people of that generation, people who are, now you know how old I am because Charlie told you, that people older than I am especially remember going to dances at the Walker Casino and going to the movies and having lunch, having Sunday dinner at the coffee pot. We lived on Grandview Drive just north of Kessler. So there had been a black neighborhood along Indiana Avenue, along MLK, then Northwestern, Boulevard Place, 38th Street. And as we know with redlining, which I'll talk a little bit about more about, those neighborhoods were starting to deteriorate because of banking policies, because of redlining. There was no investment, so you couldn't get a loan to put a new roof on a house. So there was a new community that was being built along Grandview Drive between 62nd and 64th with all black families. Part of it was because we couldn't live in other parts of the city and people wanted new houses. But it was doctors and coaches from attics and school teachers and carpenters and plumbers and people. Many of our fathers had been veterans of World War II and of the Korean War, but they couldn't get loans from the bank. And so our loan came from a black insurance company. All of these things add together to tell you why this community was created. I see Paul Mullins here, who's done tremendous research, not only on Indiana Avenue, but on that neighborhood as well. I could go through each person in the audience, but Paul, you are so key to what I know, so thank you. What I remember as we would drive from our house on Grandview Drive down Northwestern, MLK, we would pass C. Ferguson's bowling alley. His daughter and my mother were good friends. We would go to bowl at bowling. None of you remember the bowling alley, or a few of you remember the bowling alley. Baird's Cleaners. Mr. Baird lived across the street from us when we lived on Rookwood. These were black businesses that were creating wealth in the black community. Barbecue Heaven, this is actually the one on Northwestern, but there used to be, excuse me when I say Northwestern instead of MLK, but it's just stuck in my brain. But there was also a Barbecue Heaven on Indiana Avenue. But these were businesses that were people who were leaders in the community. All of that wealth was killed when the highway came through and when the campus was built. Many people talk about Indiana Avenue and the nightclubs. I was too young to go to the nightclubs, but I'm putting this here because I know that's what people think about. But there were churches, there were music schools, there were other places where people worshiped and where they raised their children, not just nightclubs. My church, Witherspoon, was at 25th and Paris. That area along MLK was a working class and middle class black neighborhood, but when the highway was being designed, it was considered an area that was blighted. It had been redlined, and so it was considered an area that could be destroyed, that a big scar could go through it, and this is what is there now. There was no reason to destroy that if there had been thought about the people in the community. And you see that the highway goes through. I wish my pictures were bigger, but this is where my church was. And that destroyed stability in a community. I just show this, again, these are pictures that I really got from Paul. I had no idea about the Central Business District plan. So after President Eisenhower came up with this idea, all of this federal money was coming in. Indianapolis began to think about redesigning downtown. They were rethinking downtown. And these are pictures from that study. And you'll notice in this picture, all of these pictures, that there are no people of color, though today I did notice there's a waiter who might be black, maybe. That's the first time I ever noticed that on a big blow-up. But essentially, this was a city that was not including the people whose houses were nearby. Thank you very much, Jordan Ryan is here. Jordan is the person who has taught me so much about redlining in Indianapolis. This is the map. And those of you, I don't think I have to explain redlining to people here tonight. And then this is a map that Jordan created that just shows where the redlined communities are and where the highway is. My neighborhood in Grandview, this is the, sort of 6 square blocks of the black families who lived there. This is my house. And Mr. Greer, who owned a liquor store on Northwestern Avenue and whose wife was the art teacher at Addicts, had bought several acres which they developed. And so he had a horse, we had an idyllic childhood along Crooked Creek. We didn't know that we were there because we couldn't be in other places. As the highway was being developed, there was also part of the master plan to develop IU's campus. Again, I know this audience knows this history, but just so you will remember and be reminded if you don't, this is what began to happen. Parking lots replaced the houses as they were torn down. And there was pushback then. Reclaim Indiana Avenue, and I don't know if Paula is here tonight or if any of the other Reclaim Indiana Avenue folks are here, but there's a long history of people trying to push back on development that was not good for the community. 1937, you can see it's very densely populated. 1979, there are fewer houses, and you're starting to see areas that have been, houses that have been torn down. Olin Dotson, who's on the Landmarks board, is not here tonight. He's getting an award elsewhere, but it was Olin who put these maps together as part of a group called OG Inc. And then you see by 1986, it's just almost empty. It's just really devastating to see this. And then 2019, lots and lots of parking lots. So that's like, why did this, from 1970 to essentially 2021, it's still parking lots. There's so much that can be developed, such a golden opportunity. So as the highway is being rethought, there also are communities that can be reimagined. So the Madam Walker Legacy Center, an anchor there, saved, thank goodness, and not torn down by a group of citizens who came together, supported for decades by the generosity of the Lilly Endowment, and recently, as many of you know, has been renovated with $15 million and a partnership with IUPUI. This is a great thing for the building to be revitalized. But in the process, there was a plan to develop the parking lot. Here's the Walker Building, and then this is the parking lot, and that's the Urban League. And the plan was going to put a large building, this building, onto that property. There were a few articles in IBJ and in the Star about this, but that really met with a great deal of opposition. And from what I know, I haven't been on the board in 10 years. I served on the board for a long time. The business model of the Madam Walker Legacy Center has always been challenged to sell enough tickets. But I think part of the challenge for the Madam Walker Legacy Center and its viability is that the neighborhood around it was never developed properly, not developed in the same way that Massachusetts Avenue was developed, not developed, redeveloped in the same way that Fountain Square was developed. If there had been commercial activity, restaurants, and other kind of viable life along Indiana Avenue, there would have been people coming to the Madam Walker Center. So going forward, it's my dream and my hope that the vision will include the south side of Indiana Avenue, where IUPUI's campus is and where the parking lots are, so that there will be something that will bring people to the Walker Building, because otherwise it will still be just there on an island by itself. Last summer, after George Floyd's murder, people began to push back. Reclaim Indiana was very upset about that building. I was part of a group that included Bishop Jennifer and Marsh Davis, Claudia Polly, Olin Dotson, Justin was an advisor, and others, and we wanted to reimagine what Indiana Avenue could be like, what that block of the 700 block could be like. But Black Lives Matter mural sort of crystallized the concerns. Reclaim Indiana Avenue, a group of folks pushed back and talked about with the city and with the planning board and said this is not really viable. And one of the things that came out of some of those conversations with the developer was someone saying to us, but it's just a blank slate. And I would say to you, it is not a blank slate for those of us who grew up there. And it should not be seen as a blank slate. There were people who lived there, or there were people who developed the community, and there are people who should be coming back to the community. This was a reimagining of that other design. It may or may not happen somewhat like that. These were provided by one of Olin Dotson's students, Jeffrey Tompkins. Another look at Blackford and Indiana Avenue, a more recent vision for the 700 block. And then even as far back as 2005, the IACD came up with plans with more green space, with looking at what could happen on the campus. So I'm just going to end with a couple of quotations from Justin, who said, "Cities are people. To quote Jane Jacobs, cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only because and only when they are created by everybody." And Stephen Gray, who is at University of Cincinnati, who like Justin is a visionary about design. And he said, "Equity is where people aren't asked whether this bench is red or blue, but rather, is this project right or wrong?" So I thank you very much. I hope there's conversation. I see so many people here tonight who I know have the ability to lead those conversations to make a difference. I love my hometown, and I just want to see it be even better. Thank you very much.
So I would like to invite Marsh Davis to come forward, and he has some special comments to make. So Marsh leads up Indiana Landmarks and has done all this amazing work with Rethink. He was there pretty much from the beginning, and we're just excited to, again, be here and to have Marsh do this presentation.
Thank you, Brenda. Great to see everybody tonight. Wonderful presentation. Thank you, Alelia. Well, I am greatly honored to present on behalf of the Rethink Coalition the inaugural Charlie Award. This is a prize that should and will take its place among our city's most distinguished and meaningful leadership awards. The Charlie is awarded by the Rethink Coalition to people who care deeply about our city and our state and put passion into action. They are people who demonstrate honesty, integrity, compassion, moral clarity, and grit. They keep up the good fight and don't give up even when the work is hard and the obstacles high. They are committed to building a more vibrant, just, fair, and exciting Indianapolis for all who live, work, and visit here. That is the Charlie. Well, the award's namesake is the irrepressible Charlie Richardson, who embodies and lives by the attributes I just listed. An uncommonly proud native of Bedford, Indiana, Charlie spent 30 years in Washington, D.C., where he was a partner with Baker and Daniels, now Faegre Drinker. During that time, his passion for the home state never abated. Upon returning to Indiana in 2018, he brought that passion and a level of energy we have all benefited from, not the least of which was through his work in the formative years and the current workings of the Rethink Coalition. Although he's shy about it and rarely mentions it, it's worth noting that Charlie is a cousin, many times removed, of Mary Todd Lincoln. Proof of which is found in the striking resemblance that is not diminished through the generations. Well, Charlie is well known for his colorful turns of phrase, many of which I cannot repeat in polite company. I call them Charlieisms. Coalition members have grown familiar with such terms as moogie foogie, cool, crisp, and pithy, super duper party pooper, and Satan set me free. Right? One of my favorite Charlieisms is what he proclaims after having discovered a food he really likes. He says, "It will change your life." Well, Charlie, you have changed our lives. Because of you, we'll never be the same. We'll be better. So a word about the trophy, the Charlie. You're probably thinking, what the hell is that? Well, the Charlie Award is topped by a piece of rubble from the demolished portion of the North Split, where it cuts across the north side of Indianapolis. The project, which was the catalyst for the creation of the Rethink Coalition. So this first Charlie Award is shared by two remarkable people. When our community learned of the impending reconstruction of the interstate highway system in Indianapolis, one of the first citizens to voice concerns and to commit to a better solution was Paul Knapp. Paul is CEO and general manager of Young & Larimore, which provides marketing and communication services to an array of local and national corporations and organizations. Paul's also an attorney, and if I may add, a preservationist. Young & Larimore's offices are housed in a historic school, one of the best adaptive reuse projects in our state. With these combined skills, communication, legal acumen, and a strong preservation ethic, Paul emerged as a leader of what is now the Rethink Coalition. I think of Paul as a Moses figure. He led the coalition from a state of confusion and disorganization into the focused and structured entity it is today. In fact, during the depths of COVID, Paul grew a prodigious beard, much like Moses's. Except, according to Charlie, he looked more like Gabby Hayes. Those of you who are under 70 may not know who Gabby Hayes was. Anyway, thank Charlie for that comparison. Sorry, Paul. There's Paul. But clean-shaven, Paul like Moses, having led us for years and accomplished his mission, pass the torch to the current leaders of the Rethink Coalition. The Charlie Award recognizes honesty, integrity, and a commitment to building a better community. That's what Paul Knapp represents. Please join me in congratulating Paul as we honor him with the Charlie Award. Come on up.
Surprise.
Congratulations. Want me to say a few words?
Well, I didn't know this was coming. The Rock is very familiar since my office looks out over the road that they're tearing apart. I greatly appreciate the sentiment behind this, but as everyone who has been involved in the coalition from the very beginning knows that this is a collective effort, if there ever was one. Without the strength of everybody involved at every step of the way, there's no way we would have made the progress we made. From the professionals to the screamers like myself, and to the folks who came maybe a year later, like Charlie, when most of us were pretty tired and a bit worn out with the battle, who added the energy that Charlie did, which was incredibly important. This was a total collective effort, so I will take this, but I will take it as a representative of the rest of the group. We couldn't have done it without everybody, but thank you, Marcia.
Well, sharing the Charlie Award is another stellar leader who needs no introduction, having been introduced by Charlie himself earlier. And that is, of course, A'Lelia Bundles, who's indeed a true living legend, as Charlie mentioned, having been so named by the Indiana Historical Society last month. To that and to Charlie's terrific introduction, I would add that we at Indiana Landmarks are incredibly honored by A'Lelia's presence on our board of directors. She carries a powerful legacy begun by her great-great-grandmother and passed through the generations of her family. It's a legacy she bears with grace and one she shares for the betterment of our world. Who better could embody the attributes of the Charlie Award? So on behalf of the Rethink Coalition, I am honored to present the Charlie Award to A'Lelia Bundles.
So, Marsh, thank you. And I have my first meeting. I have my orientation meeting for the board next week. And my first meeting, I will be here in December. But I'm really, I hope this isn't a bad joke, but I feel like Michael Corleone. But, I keep being drawn back in, but happily drawn back in to participate in conversations about the future of my hometown. So thank you.